Now, a third major difference between blocking and checking is that they each require a different amount of distance or range in order to be possible. Right? And you can see that in our self-defense techniques, most of the time we first do a block as our opponent gets close, and then afterwards we start using a series of checks in order to make sure that our opponent cannot follow up his initial strike. In order to successfully execute a block, you need a certain minimum distance between you and your opponent. We need enough time and distance to be able to first identify the strike that our opponent is attacking us with, right? And then we got to be able to select the right block really quickly, and we got to be able to physically execute the correct block, right? And there's a point where our opponent is going to be too close, and it's no longer going to be possible to execute a block. Right? You need a certain minimum distance. Once our opponent gets too close, we are no longer able to first see the strike, then figure out what we're going to do about it, and then actually physically still be able to execute the block against that. It's just too close. There's not enough room. There's not enough time anymore. So blocks, in order to be fast enough, require a certain minimum distance between us and our opponent. Checks don't. Checks are different. A lot of times the closer you are to your opponent, the easier it is to check him. So once our opponent is too close to block, checks are going to solve that problem for us. That's important to understand. And all of our self-defense techniques in Ed Parker's Kenpo reflect that, and they're going to go through that sequence. That's why the block is always first, and then the check comes after that. Right? Do keep in mind that checks can take different forms or shapes. In other words, a check can be a push, a check can be a pull, a check can be a strike, a check can be any body manipulation that somehow restricts your opponent from all of the strikes, from executing all of the strikes. So one of the best ways that you can look at how Kenpo Karate uses blocks and checks in conjunction with the strikes is by comparing it to the game of billiards or pool. Right? Both of these, Kenpo or self-defense, as well as the game of billiards, have the same goals. Right? So the first goal, if you were to play billiards, is to make your shot. Right? But an expert billiard player is a step above that. An expert billiard player will develop the skill to not just make that one single shot, but to also set up his next shot, which of course means he has to control where the cue ball ends up after each shot. Right? And that's very similar to Kenpo Karate or self-defense. Every strike should set you up for your next strike. Right? Those things go hand in hand. Now, but there's an additional consideration in both Kenpo as well as billiards, and that is, if you for some reason, or if for any reason your opponent now gets another opportunity to strike or to do his move, you want to make sure that he is in the worst possible position to do that. In billiards, we make sure that the cue ball is not positioned in a way or in a place, in a location that is advantageous to him. We want to make sure that cue ball is in the worst possible spot for him, right? And so that's very, very similar to the idea in Kenpo. We want to make sure that we have a good strike. We also want to make sure that we set up our next strike, and we want to prevent our opponent from setting up his or her strikes. Right? In other words, if for any reason we are not able to strike our opponent, we are still able, using checks, to keep our opponent from striking us.